Hello everyone, welcome. I'm going to do something completely different today, or perhaps rather I'm going to go back to the beginning. About a year ago, a little bit over a year, I started this YouTube channel thinking that it would be a good idea to read out translations that I had done from Spanish into English of an author, especially one author, a mystic, Spanish mystic from the 16th century. And I did that for a while, and some of you stayed with me since then. And then I moved on to talk about history and literature and many other things, including a little bit of politics from time to time. I did that both in English and in Spanish, reading in Spanish the original of the book and reading to you in English my own translation. I have received not very many, but enough. I mean 3 or 4 really, comments of people who tell me that they can no longer find these readings in my channel. And that is true because I unloaded them. What is the right word? I took them out. I wasn't particularly happy to do that, but I took them out because the videos themselves were pretty bad. In other words, I didn't know quite what I was doing, and I was just reading, and I was still using the computer microphone. The light was terrible. Sometimes I had a light right here on my face, and other times I was practically in the dark. And they were quite bad, really. So I thank all of you who actually put, just stayed with me there. But so when I received these comments, I thought, well, perhaps some people are looking for them and they would like to hear them. And I went back to them, to my files. And that is when I realized how bad they were. And I said, I cannot possibly put this up again. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do it again. So I'm going to devote a whole week to these readings. Why? Because I really truly believe they are important. I'm going to call them really spiritual exercises. And they were important because they were written in the 1570s, 80s and 90s when the world was also going through great struggle and sudden changes. And I think they have something to tell us today. We need to step back a little bit and reflect and rest our minds and feed our souls. That is why I'm going to call them spiritual exercises. There is another not quite so important matter, but something that worries me a little bit. In this struggle with Israel that we're living through at the moment, we hear about the evangelicals in America and in Congress and all that. You've heard it. And it seems to me that Americans, just as they have appropriated really the word American, many of them have appropriated the word Christian. And we in the Catholic Church call them Protestants, the descendants of the Reformers. And in many of the American churches, which of course are free, or they consider themselves free to interpret Christianity as they wish, that many of them follow Calvin. Not all of them, but a lot of them based their interpretation of Christianity on Calvinism. And Calvinism to the Catholic Church, that is the Catholic and the Orthodox churches, when they were one, the original church, Calvinism was always a heresy, at least until yesterday, or perhaps 10 or 11 years ago with this Pope who is trying to change doctrine. So it seems, I find it unpleasant that the world is looking at Christianity as interpreted by a tiny minority of Protestants. And so I want to use this mystic to say that Christianity may be something else, or at least is not 100% what they believe. In my personal opinion, erroneously. So, the third thing is that because, as I said, these are going to be spiritual exercises, I'm going to try to record them beforehand and schedule them always for the same time. And this time I thought about it, and I think 10 o'clock at night is the best time. Why? Because during the day we're busy, we have many things to do, we have a lot of things in our minds. And to hear or read this, here in your case, I think it's important that we are at rest. You know, at the end of the day is the best time. Now 10 o'clock might be a little bit too early for some of you. Perhaps that is the time when you're busiest or you want to watch other things. I understand that. But much later, 11, 12 o'clock, a lot of people who have to get up very, very early. I know my sister goes to bed at 10 o'clock. It's 11 or 12 o'clock might be too late for them. My purpose here is that it is at a time when you can recollect yourself and rest, and then have the time to listen. I'm going to also try to be as disciplined as I can in not going over 30 or 40 minutes. Sometimes, hopefully, I will keep to that. Okay, so let's start. First of all, the dedication of the book. Okay, and then the very short introduction, and then I will just read you a very short chapter, just to give you very easy with anecdotes and so on, just very easy for you to see what this is going to be about. Okay, so the dedication is the author, as I told you, is Juan de los Ángeles, preacher, a mystic, a Franciscan friar. And this is how he starts his dedication of the book. I have been wondering to whom to dedicate this book on a most loving spiritual struggle. The name of the book is the spiritual struggle between God and the soul. All right. I have been wondering to whom to dedicate this book on a most loving spiritual struggle, hoping that it would befit and be of benefit to this person. And although I could think of many had its subject matter been different, being what it is, I have hardly found one. Because when I consider the cowardice and effeminate spirit this century of ours has produced, which seems to me to be the one that first came up with that mandate of Pharaoh, that males be killed and females spared, I am left not knowing with whom to treat of this divine militia, one which allows only for vigorous and skillful soldiers to be admitted to its ranks. Especially since the Holy Spirit warns us in no unclear terms not to treat of war with the coward. Quote, from Ecclesiastes. Treat not with a man without religion concerning holiness, nor with an unjust man concerning justice, not with the woman touching her of whom she is jealous, not with the coward concerning war, nor with the merchant concerning traffic, nor with the buyer of selling, nor with an envious man of giving thanks, nor with the ungodly of piety, nor with the dishonest of honesty, nor with the field labourer of every work, nor with him that worketh by the year of the finishing of the year, nor with the idle servant of much business. Give no heed to this in any matter of counsel, but be continuously with the holy man, whomsoever thou shalt know, to observe the fear of God, whose soul is according to thy own soul, and who, when thou stumble in the dark, will be sorry for thee. Noteworthy, to be sure, that when Solomon describes in the Song of Songs, the Canticle of Canticles, the most chaste love between Christ and his church, second only to the names of spouse and beloved, the words he uses most are those that refer to instruments of war, armies, valiant soldiers, fortresses, and all manner of armory. In chapter 3 he says, Behold, 80 valiant ones of the most valiant of Israel surrounded the bed of Solomon, all holding swords, and most experts in war. In chapter 4, Thy neck is as the tower of David, which is built with bulwarks. 1,000 bucklers hang upon it, all the armour of valiant men. In chapter 1, To my company of horsemen in Pharaoh's chariots have I likened thee, O my love. In chapter 6, Thou art beautiful, O my love, sweet and comely as Jerusalem, terrible as an army set in array. And in chapter 7, the maidens, having asked the spouse to turn her countenance towards them, that they may rejoice in her beauty, she answers, What shalt thou see in the Solomonites but the company of camps? For such was not the time to treat of matters proper of women and gallants, but of arms and men of war. It is not of my beauty that I pride myself, but of my bravery, not my look, but my sword, and fighting and dying for my spouse in the challenge that concerns me. And in chapter 8 of the Canticles, If our spouse be a wall, let us mount cannon on it against her enemies. Ultimately, what we have here is a combat, a war of love, in which the delicate and the effeminate are cast aside, and the only ones welcome are brave, courageous men, robust men, men with hair on their chests, well trained in the art of war. Because if we are to struggle with our passions, if we are to struggle against self-love, against our libertine self-will, against the never-ending lust of this world for prestige and possessions and pleasures, and what concern me in this book specifically, if we are to struggle with God himself and wound him in love, and capture him, and suffer his injuries, his chains, his afflictions, his transformations, his inebriations, and his deaths. Necessary it is that we be brave, that we be like the cavalry or the squadrons of Pharaoh, insurmountable, that we be like the Tower of David with its camps, fortifications, shields, and brave soldiers' armory, that we be terrible as that army of soldiers in array ready for battle, If we are to assist at the couch of our great Solomon and keep watch at his sleep, that we be of the gritty and spirited of Jerusalem, and our sword at the ready be most skillful in warfare, especially that brought about by devils in the night, that we may be like a walled and formidable fortress against sin. And where am I to find one of these valiant soldiers with whom to speak of this war, ruling Pharaoh in the world, and having planned and designed that men die and the effeminate live? I have sometimes reflected on that law in Exodus, where Moses ordains that all firstborn male offspring of men as well as of beasts be offered to God, and that which is female be accepted, be they first or only born. And it occurs to me that women were excluded not because of their being women, but because of what the feminine, or perhaps the effeminate, signifies: weak and flaccid, the fickle, that which lacks valor and distinction, what God dismisses from his house and holy temple. And as punishment for their grave sins, Isaiah says that God will take away from the house of Judah and from Jerusalem the brave, the strong men of war, and give them child kings and child princes and effeminate and pampered leaders, those raised amidst fine linens and silks and cotton wool. Of these said Solomon, fear casteth down the slothful, and the soul of the effeminate shall be hungry. He that is loose and slack in his work is the brother of him that wasteth his own works. Not only do the lazy and the licentious not engage in manly works, they are also like those who go around wrecking what has already been built, brothers of the squanderer and the loose. I am saying that the spirit of that law of Moses was to condemn and exclude from the temple of God and of his service the effeminate, the fond of ease, the spoiled, men who can't suffer a sneeze for God. Of these the world is full now. Most men these days are dolls, womanish, flaccid and weak, lacking in virtue and lacking in manhood. Like women, they rouge and powder themselves and call to be carried around in litters. They admire and beautify themselves in front of mirrors, and pretty soon they'll be wearing plumicorns and pompadours and bows and sashes at their waist, the sword too heavy for their delicate frames. And Calvary and armor and struggle and discipline are to them villages in France. We are now living in that most unhappy and most dangerous of times, of which the apostle said that men would come to fall in love with themselves, like Narcissus, and of which Plato spoke as being the source of all the evils that could befall the world, as did Aristotle, who said it was the most infamous, thus effeminate, infamous name that could be applied to men. Erunt homines se ipsos amantes. Puffed up and in love with themselves, concerned only with their comforts, their caprices, and their delectations, their self-gratification, their own keeping and self-interest. And the apostle goes on to give a long litany of the evils that follow from this. Quote, know also this, that in the last day shall come dangerous times. Men shall be lovers of themselves, covetous, haughty, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, wicked, without affection, without peace, slanderous, incontinent, unmerciful, without kindness, traitors, stubborn, puffed up, and lovers of pleasures more than of God. That is St. Paul's epistle to Timothy 3:2-4. Look at these sad progeny of wicked children sired by self-love, and see what will be needed to take to the field and do battle with them. Not the 30,000 that Gideon would take with him to fight the Midianites, but the 300 that remained by God's command, excluded and rejected the timid and faint-hearted, the frivolous, those who to drink would lay themselves down, the effeminate in spirit. How would Jeremiah cry in his lamentations, this lack of valiant men? The noble sons of Zion, and they that were clothed with the best gold, how are they esteemed as earthen vessels, the work of the potter's hand. At one time, those chosen, those dressed in gold from Ophir, were men who would pass through furnaces of fire and teeth of beasts, and after enduring crosses and swords and racks of iron, were left yet more pure and transparent. Now we have pots of clay breaking at the slightest jolt. To those who would allow themselves to be sliced and slivered and thrown to the flames for refusing to burn but one single grain of incense to the idols, have now succeeded. Oh, vessels so fragile, men who for no reason commit 1,000 sins. These are not made for this war of love which demands vigorous, courageous, spirited soldiers willing to put all their passions to the sword. Those who have overpowered the world and trampled over its greed and self-indulgence, men who have gone through the purgative life for many a year, progress favorably in the illuminative life, and aspire to a most loving union with God. For these I am writing this book, these I seek for this combat. Goes on then to dedicate a few more to his brothers, the Franciscans. And a very short introduction, that was the dedication. The introduction reads thus: declares the intention of the work, of the author in this work. Declares the intention of the author in this work. Laertius tells us, that is Diogenes Laertius in the Lives of the Philosophers, that when an inquiring listener asked the philosopher Zeno why all philosophers' sayings were too brief, as if disapproving of brevity, he replied, "You speak truly, and if it were possible, so should all utterances be. Because truth is not in need of many words, and we remember better what is concise and to the point." Epictetus, as Gellius relates, and that is Aulus Gellius in Noctes Attica, Epictetus used to sum up and embrace all of philosophy in only 2 words: sustine et abstine. For a true philosopher accepts all sorrows and abstains from all joys which offer themselves in equal abundance. Neither does he lose heart in adversity, nor does he degenerate in prosperity. The Spartans were great lovers of brevity. When Lycurgus was asked the reason for this, he said, quia silentio finitimum, meaning that after silence, the next best thing is abbreviation. A few years ago, I wrote a book entitled The Triumphs of the Love of God, but the difficulty of the subject made me go on and on, adding reasons to reasons and words to more words, and the work grew more than it should have done. And treating, as it does, of an art that teaches the highest path the affections should follow, which Dionysius termed mystical theology, it is appropriate that a book on this subject should be brief and its precepts few and substantial, even though so-called common people may not understand them. This is because, to speak truly, this doctrine is not for everyone. It is for those who have already been through the exercises of the purgative and illuminative life, for which many long-winded treatises already abound. Later, with this in mind, and wishing to imitate the Spartans, who would not say with words what they could say with silence, I determined, having first commended my work to God, and having consulted religious and spiritual leaders, I determined to work for a few days and try to see if I could cut out the superfluous, clarify the obscure, substantiate the uncertain, and to remove passages difficult even for scholars perhaps to follow. And because of this, I think I can now say that although no new chapters have been added, what has emerged is an altogether new book, both in quality and brevity. That is why I changed the title to The Spiritual and Loving Struggle Between God and the Soul, because our spiritual life really is a loving struggle where pure souls come to wrestle with God through the affections, love's holes and throws. Receive them, then, Catholic reader, my good wishes, and trust me in this, that you will find that this book will prove beneficial for the perfect state of the contemplative life. Sure, you will find many other works that will entertain your weary soul with their elegance and rolling inferences and curiosities and variety. By the ensuing change in your conduct will we see of how much benefit they have been. I have seen many people lauding and celebrating these books all the way up to heaven, always the same people, by the way. But they all seem to serve for is recreation. Like those elegant, most eloquent sermons in church that people like to hear, after which they come out of church exactly as they went in. But in this book about the divine art of loving, should you read it with the aim of attaining that love and apply yourself as a student does to the study of grammar, I assure you of its profitability, and that before long you will find yourself a changed person, because, as you will see, you will attain more benefit in one day through this exercise of love than in many months or perhaps years in others. May God grant you the knowledge of the truth of His sacred love, the ointment that, as Jesus said in His Gospel, teaches all things. Okay, so I'm going to start in very short chapter, I think it's chapter 4. Because he does a lot of philosophizing about the different types of love, and he goes back to Aristotle and so on. But this chapter 4 is an easy one to hear, I think, and it's full of anecdotes. And it's not very long, so I will finish this reading with this one. That only love can triumph over God and wrestle with Him, and of the right time and place for this struggle to take place. Divine scripture tells us that when the patriarch Jacob was going to his land, carrying along with him much property and riches, fearful of meeting with his brother Esau, and having readied himself beforehand to placate and avoid his wrath, he first passed over with his 2 wives, sons, and servants to the other side of the Jabbok, and then in private and secluded from all, he prayed. And behold, says the sacred passage, a man wrestled with him until daybreak. And when this man saw he could not subdue and overpower Jacob, he gripped his knee, dislocating the hip joint, and the nerve died. But through it all, Jacob retained his strength, and so much so that the man wrestling with him, who was God or an angel in his name, pleaded with him to set him free, for dawn was breaking and he did not want to be seen by anyone. But Jacob was aware, because of the pinch in the knee, that the man with whom he had been wrestling was of divine virtue, and would not free him until he had received his blessing. The angel asked him his name, and he answered that his name was Jacob. And the angel said to him, "Hereafter your name shall not be Jacob," which means fighter, but Israel, which means Prince of God, that you may lose your fear of Esau, for it is with God that you have been wrestling, and he who has prevailed over God shall fear no man. The prophet Hosea makes mention of this struggle in chapter 12, where he says, "With such force did Jacob seize the angel, that the angel wept, and in humility asked him to let him go." Admirable contest, to be sure. God grappling with man, and man prevailing over God. God weeping and supplicating of man to be given his freedom. God knuckled under and defeated. I know that in its literal sense, this means that God, almighty though he is, allowed himself to be out-rivaled by Jacob so as to give his friend confidence and banish his fear. But in its spiritual and mystical sense, what transpires clearly to me is a struggle of a different kind, a more admirable struggle wherein man really and truly prevails over God and man conquers God. And this is what I mean. What can this struggle be but the struggle of love? For if not in love, who would dare take God on in an arm-to-arm contest? Only love can do this, said Saint Bernard. And what an extraordinary thing it is to be able to engage God in an open-arm combat. If God is angry with me, I will fear him, I will tremble, I will ask him to forgive me, for it is written, "Who hath resisted him and hath had peace?" But it is not for me to be angry with God. And should he argue with me, it is not for me to argue back, for my dissension will only justify him more in his cause. And if he judges me, it is not for me to judge him, but to prostrate myself on the ground, adore him, and say with the prophet, "Hear, O Lord, my prayer. Give ear to my supplication in thy truth. Hear me in thy justice, and enter not into judgment with thy servant, for in thy sight no man living shall be justified." That is from Job 9:3. He is Lord I am servant. He is to command, I am to obey. For as Job said, the wrath of God is not for man to resist, nor is there power in heaven or earth that can overcome him. He before whom angels and the mighty of the world bow down. The previous one was from the Psalm 142. But because he loves me, and it is this love that wounds and hurts, should I not repay him in the same coin? Have I not license to love God and wound him with my love? Only to love is it given to struggle with God, and God in his love wants nothing more than to be loved in return, and this is the requital he desires and hopes for. These are the words of Saint Bernard. And elsewhere he says, O tenderness, O grace, O power of love. The highest made himself the lowest of all. And what could have brought this to pass but love, which knows no majesty? Love, rich in deference, mighty in giving, convincing in persuasion. Is there anything more powerful than this? When we know that love prevails over God, then we see that it is an act of love for plenitude to overflow, for majesty to acquiesce, for singularity to keep company. O wondrous fight which Jacob had with the angel, in which God feigned surrender and was finally freed from his grasp. But we shall not let him feign in our loving struggle with him, even if he tries. The patriarch had said, I will not free you until you bless me. But a holy soul in love beseechingly says, now that I have you, I shall not let you go. Not give me your blessing, Lord, and I will set you free, but I am holding you, and I will go on holding you, and I won't let go. It is not your blessing, it is you whom I want. What could I have in heaven? What could I seek on earth that is not you? Ultimately, love ignores all that is not of the beloved, for it is only when in possession of this beloved that we find all riches and bliss. The spouse holds her beloved and does not let go, and he is happy to be held. And in order that she might keep holding him, he with his mighty hand holds her. You held me by my right hand, said the prophet. Psalm 72. I put it in these words so that we see what love is capable of doing, and do not marvel at seeing love prevailing over men, since it prevails over God. What the patriarch did to enter in this open combat is especially worthy of consideration for our own spiritual struggle, as is the time he spent wrestling with God. He took with him, says divine scripture, neither sons, wife, nor property, but retired alone, and alone he struggled with the angel, because things external are burdensome and restricting to the spiritual man in his dealings with God. And it is pure madness to try to follow Christ, who is barefoot and naked, fully adorned and with sandals on our feet. How can we run after this divine mighty giant, loaded up like beasts of burden? When Moses, by God's command, had to deliver Israel from Egypt, he sent his wife, children, and the father of his wife to Jethro, that he might be free and unconstrained in his journey to the promised land. So did the apostles, and so do all apostolic men. At the very least, they must unfetter their heart and despise things worldly as far as they are able, if a meaningful relationship with God is what they seek. For he who desires a close friendship with the Creator and does not leave behind what is of the world is like a bird stuck to the birdlime. In its desire to fly high, it keeps flapping its wings, but never manages to get off the ground. If runners and wrestlers unclothe themselves to help them win corruptible palms and laurels, says the Apostle, with how much more reason should we divest ourselves of things worldly if we want to win that incorruptible and ever-living crown? But since I am dealing with this shedding of things temporal, with renunciation and abnegation of the will elsewhere in this treatise, it would be well to consider now the time spent in that battle, a battle that took place at night, since the angel said to Jacob, "Let me go, for day is dawning." He wrestled all night, but it was upon seeing daylight that he pleaded to be freed. No time is more propitious for prayer and struggle with God than the night, because all is quiet, because we are alone. Night is a time when it befits the heart to be serene and in solitude, collected to itself. As it is said of Josaphat, who, seized by fear, betook himself wholly to prayer. And of Solomon it is written that from the depths of his soul he begged God for wisdom. The holy prophet David in one of the Psalms says, "Hear me, Lord, I have called you from my heart." Recollect your heart and all exterior and interior energies onto it. And do not be so imprudent as to think you can start struggling with God carelessly or in jest. There is a passage in St. Matthew that exhorts us to pray with our doors closed. "And when ye pray, ye shall not be as the hypocrites that love to stand and pray in the synagogues and corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. Amen, I say to you, they have received their reward." I understand this passage to be referring not so much to the vainglory offered us by being seen praying, but rather to the need also of the heart for solitude and seclusion whilst at prayer, or else it will wander after every puerility and trifle it sets its eyes on. It is for this reason that all who engage in this high exercise should avoid curiosities and overmuch abundance of images or anything else in their private oratories, because sometimes these serve more as a distraction than as a means to devotion. A crucifix or a portrait of the crucified Christ should suffice, or something similar. Avoid all else if you want to avoid straying and interference from impertinent or idle imaginations. The stillness of the night will help, for it is friendly to spiritual battles and duels with God, and to converse with the blessed. The sensual and worldly man fancies that God made the night solely for him to slip through it, or to go like a night hound hunting for what is not given him in daylight, and is forbidden by divine law. And I say that he deludes himself, for God made it so that we might search for him in it and remember his grace. Let us read the lives of the desert fathers, many of whom would never lie down to sleep. When they did, the bare earth was their pillow. They slept with such moderation that one of them, Arsenius, came to say that for the servant of God 1 hour of sleep should be enough, and he would not give to his body the night of the Sabbath. He would begin to pray at sunset and be still at prayer at sunrise. Of the blessed Saint Onofre, it is said that he had neither roof over his head nor bed for many a year, but the desert itself, and when and where sleep befell him, he would only rest a while. Saint Jerome, writing to Stoichum, says, "He who allows himself to be easily overcome by sleep will not have the strength to resist the devil." All saints were sons of light, and in consequence sons of God, who is light, and not of night and darkness, for they hardly knew what sleep was. During the day we are never exempt of cares that assails us and steal our remembrance of God, but at night, in its silence and quietude, we can raise our hearts to Him with ease. At night, says Chrysostom, the soul is purer, finer, lighter, to rise above itself. The dark, its tranquility, invites us, summons us to contrition and tears. If you look up at the heavens on a fair and serene night, you will see that it is full of eyes, twinkling, sparkling, singing, as the prophet says, the glory of God. And if you then turn your eyes and look down below, you will find that those who during the day laughed, played, negotiated, and invented all manner of wickedness without end, at night look as if dead in their graves. And then you decry the madness of man, his arrogance, self-deceit, and his idiotic haughtiness. For sleep and darkness are portrayals of death, and two of the things that best teach us to ponder about life in a Christian manner. Prostrate yourself on the ground, says Chrysostom, get down on your knees. Cry at night. Pray to your God that He might be benevolent. He is pleased and gratified with prayers in the night, a night that, though delegated by nature to rest and sleep, you can turn into a time for tears. The prophet did well to divide night from day, devoting days to works of service and night to the service of praise. Use the night to occupy yourself praising God and to talk and get to know Him, for during the day He leaves, even if you do not want Him to, so that you can attend to your duties, to works of charity, to visiting the sick and those confined in all manners of prisons, to managing your own family affairs, your children, feeding your children, and other good works. Moses would climb the mountain from time to time to struggle with God, but then he would come down with time to build abodes with the people. Not always should we be merry, hanging on to God. At times we must all be Martha too, who tends to the gifts of Christ and to His servants. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.